Follow that car. Hey, follow that limo. This is a chase, okay? Wherever it goes, you go. You're not moving. This is the opposite of chasing. What? I will slap you if you don't move this car. I'm gonna slap you. I'm gonna slap you. Okay. All right. Okay, look. Here. You understand that?
Now you're speaking my language.
Well, get the hell on, man.
All right, guys. So, as the video cat might have introduced here, we are talking today about the simplicity in communication, and not only communicating in a way that you understand, but communicating in a way that they actually will understand.
Yes.
Threatening your employees to slap them to get their job done right doesn't work. A lot of the time paying them more money, sometimes that works, as it may, obviously it worked for Chris there. Or in rush hour. Anyway, I'm tired already. This is
But what we're getting to is that we're speaking the same language, right? Like you want your team, your organization to speak that same language. And sometimes coming out guns blazing saying, do this. A lot of times people don't know the how, the why, or the what behind why you're even asking that. And so sometimes it's going to take you several times. There's going to be escalations and frustrations of why can't you just go and do when they might not understand what it is that you're trying to get them to accomplish. So it's follow that car. But now you're speaking my language. Like once you finally connected, you're speaking that same language, then you can move forward and elevate together, right?
absolutely. So the biggest problem, and granted, we have captured and touched on this before. We have processes and procedures that need to be in place. We have clarity and communication that needs to be in place, right? This is part of both of those things, is having those. But the problem is we still have very unrealistic expectations on people understanding. Like, if I just hand you a straight up, again, huge book like this, right? And say, okay, yeah, there's 500 different methods. Here's all our processes. Here's all our procedures. Here's a breakdown and everything else. How many people are going to read the second or second page or try skimming that and then lose their ever freaking mind?
Exactly.
There's a reason that most men don't read instructions.
Or ask.
Or ask that. Part is pride. The other part is that just it, like, we zone out and everything halfway through. Like, this is stupid. This is a waste of my time, or aggravation, or whatever else. Occasionally, we might consult back to those or look at them, but it still is aggravating, right? It's still frustrating and everything else. It's not a fun, arduous process. Sitting in front of those old 70s training videos, also painful, miserable. It does not effective. How many people have watched those, and do you actually remember any of those videos and everything, or just that you hated them?
Right. Yeah. Like, and yeah, what was the takeaway there? And oftentimes, like, I will make a video to share with other people about a system, a process, an idea and stuff. And I know up front that like very few are actually going to look at that video or watch it in my purpose of making that. I already know that already. However, what I've come to find out is the fact that that is there gives them some element of security and confidence to know, okay, I see the headline. I have a resource right here. I'm willing to go and give it a college try, because if I slip, if I make a mistake, there's a safety net there that's going to help me along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And granted, I think that there's a fine line, right? If you look at any of so here's a great example. If you go through any of the documentation for like Microsoft, which I've been doing this entire time, for this, literally for the last 4 hours and everything, before we got on this call, I was literally going through that, combing through all these documentations, trying to figure out why this one thing was not working. And come to find out, in one fine print, in one clause, in 12 different like articles and that down the road, finally, like right before, I found out that the changes that were made and that the reason they weren't working is that they can take up to 48 hours after you click it to have it actually apply or anything. So instead of me clicking on it, having it work, and and me getting aggravated, like me sitting there for literally hours to be like, why the heck is this not working? This is enabled. All these settings are correct, blah, blah, blah. Finally, after all of that, like that, it doesn't change that that's something that should have taken me literally 5 minutes, right? Fine to find.
Yeah.
The fact that I had to literally comb through 50 different articles and had 12 different of our personal account reps that didn't even know that. That's what the problem is, right? It was an unheard of wasted amount of time. And so there again is a fine balance. That's over documentation that then makes things extremely difficult to find and figure out. And I get it. Some of you have very complicated companies. Some of you have extensive procedures. Some of you have extensive other things. But there is ways to be like, hey, here's the main synopsis and everything. And here's the proper wiki for our company for any of the other detailed or documentation for the individual processes, if that makes sense. So that way I can actually search through that and say, hey, here's the basic summary, here's some use case scenarios. And that's why I love those documentation that it'll have like a brief video and says like, hey, we're going to cut the crap. We're not going to deal with any of this stuff. Here's how to do your job, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if these things come up, then consult this, right? If this happens or this error code happens, okay, this could mean these things, right? And then you can do a breakdown summary and detailed things at that point, because at that point, I'm actually looking with the intent to solve a specific problem, right?
Yeah.
Now, it applies in sales teams or customer service team, and that is like, hey, I just need to know how to sell, right? I just need to know how to do the customer service or anything else. And then I also need to know where to find the information if I don't know the answer, right? And
how can I get help? Yeah. In fact, that little fine print, who knows if the technical writer that put that together was like, this is common knowledge for me. I'm just going to just do a thing because it's not even that big a deal to me, right? So that person may have been common knowledge for him, thinking it's, who cares? I guess I'll just put this right here because it's not a big deal. But for other people that don't know how big a deal that was, so there's a gap there that needs to be addressed.
Well, there's a big deal with that, and they can be like, well, we're a giant company, we don't care, blah, 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 which is the mentality of a lot of bigger companies like that. That's just the reality. But they don't understand that when I have a 1,200 employee organization that is waiting on these policies, and I'm like, hey, I did get this done, and they're like, hey, none of this is still working, and I have to be like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It takes 48 hours to apply these stupid things, and that from whenever they do that, and it's not in my hands anymore, it's on theirs, and I have to wait for them to actually finish it on their side. That's aggravating regardless, right?
That is, but if you can set the right expectation, hey, I'm going to make these changes and stuff. I know they're very important to be made. Turns out it can take up to about 48 hours for these to occur. If anything happens before that, I'll definitely circle back and let you know, right? But you're setting that expectation so that, yes, it's frustrating and stuff, but they don't have to be like, we called you 2 days ago and still nothing, right? If you said nothing, that's what it would feel like, right?
Well, that's the worst thing is when you get that, and then there's somebody in the organization that also didn't get that communication, that it would take that, right? Because it doesn't trickle down necessarily.
Yes.
And then 2 days down the road or a couple hours after the fact, the settings finally apply, and they're like, oh, you just did your job. Like, actually, it was a while ago.
Yeah, I've been working on it, and trust me, I want this solved as fast as you do, but yeah, they just all of a sudden just got to the party, right?
Yeah, and granted, we can't always control that, and it would be nice when you have those. Luckily, that was more of a one-off. It was a very, very specific setting or situation, but I know that this situation applies in other realms. It applies in other things, and that things take time a lot of time. It's the same thing if you do wire or ACH transfer or a refund on somebody's credit card or whatever the case may be. We all know that that's going to take a couple days for them to clear, to go through these processes, to other stuff, and that is somewhat common knowledge, but not, well, it's somewhat common knowledge to people in the industry, right? But to that person that wants that money back yesterday, it's still aggravating, right? And it still causes other issues in that. But in setting that, that's where having that knowledge and setting that expectation up front is important. But also, so when it comes to this, right? If it, I'm not an employee, obviously, of Microsoft, right? And they are constantly changing that product, constantly.
Yep.
With some of their evolutions and current acquisitions, and the fact that they're trying to mull things in and loop it in, which makes it very difficult for all IT providers to figure out, okay, here's where things have changed, here's where things have moved, here's what this is. And so that works the same way. And it's the same thing you need to do for your employees, is like, hey, we get it. You are making all these changes on a constant basis, especially when you're a startup, especially when you're a smaller company or anything. There's going to be a lot of things that change at a very rapid pace, or nothing will happen for a while, and then everything gets done all of a snap of a finger, because you have to overhaul this, you have to change these processes, you have to get these things done to make the goal. And so, as you were saying in an earlier story, that there's a lot of people, though, that they don't even do the basics. Like, they don't do the manual, they don't do training videos, they don't do anything. They literally just throw them in front of a machine and magically expect them to figure it out. That's like, again, go from a technical standpoint, if you've used Microsoft Word and you've used Google Docs, tell me that they're the same freaking program.
Yeah, exactly. They're not, like, right? Like,
it's drastically different.
Exactly.
They're both a Word document, right? They both accomplish the exact same function and everything else. You can argue with me all you want on that. It doesn't change that it still is the same thing, just like Sheets and Excel, right? Same goal, same things, everything else. So you have to understand, as a business owner, it doesn't matter if you're making cookies, right? And there's 500 other places or employees that you hired from another cookie place. They're going to have a drastically different expectation on how to make those cookies than you do. You might use different machines. You might have different processes. You might have a different clean room. You might have different assembly, different logistics, and everything else. So you can't just throw them in and be like, hey, this is something an idiot could do, and blah, blah, blah. Because you haven't communicated your systems, your processes, and everything else, and you have no way for them to actually look into those or do those. And so if you are finding people that aren't stepping into that or falling short, especially within the first couple months, I would look at it as like, hey, this is a failure to train. This is a failure for us to be or setting them up for success.
Right. And like you talk about a lot, it comes down to leadership, and it falls on the leader. As a matter of fact, I had a recent conversation with a friend who had left their career of what they knew for a quarter of a century over to go to another company that had been established but was just really small. And they went to this company, and in talking with them, they were only there for a few months, to where the wheels started falling apart for my friend because of these things that you're talking about. What was second nature to the owner was not second nature to him. And then he would bring ideas or suggestions that the owner would ask for. And then the owner would question, why would you bring me such stupid ideas? That's not how it works. Yet they didn't take the time to properly train, have systems, have automations.
They don't have the process in the first place, too. Like,
exactly.
Instead of just being condescending, it's like, hey, we haven't done that because of this, or we can't do this because we're not at this level. In order to have that you're talking about, we need to be triple the size we are, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes that is the case. That is a lot of the time where they don't understand, and it's great to have employees that are helpful or suggesting, and you don't want to necessarily kill that. And that's where having that communication and fostering that proper culture and environment of communication. And when employers do that, like the situation you just talked about, that is literally fostering the negative, toxic culture that we are trying to avoid, and we've talked about in previous podcasts.
Yes. In fact, I've experienced that myself, leaving, one organization, going to another, bringing, ideas of growth and things like that, like was the understanding going in, but then, limited mindsets. And we've always done it this way because hindering that. And then those good people that you bring over go quiet because they're like, I'm not valued here. I'm not heard here. I can get in line with what their current processes are and everything, but then Beyond that, if that's what it is, or just maintaining status quo, it is what it is, then communicate that to your people that we just want to be here at this level. This is all I'm asking you to do. Or if it's, hey, we want to grow, let's grow together. Let's be open-minded. Let's get a little bit uncomfortable throughout this process. But it's important to make sure that everybody's got that same level of understanding of what the objective is. And they can't just guess that. They can't read your mind if you're the leader.
Absolutely. The other caveat I will say of that is sometimes people are just not a great culture fit. Sometimes that is the case. And that means, like, for example, we've had great people that, like, they were great individuals otherwise we wouldn't have hired them in the first place. But then there were certain things that happened that made it to where they clearly just weren't very driven. They got very content very quickly, or they had a very hard time picking up the skills. And even though we had invested a substantial amount of time or money or whatever else into them, they might start doing the job correctly for a couple weeks or whatever else, and then they just get complacent, right? Yeah. And when they get complacent and everything, and I have to be like, hey, you're slacking again. Hey, you're slacking again. Like, hey, like, that's where, for me, I don't want to have to deal with that at all. So I need to, for me, and that I am more looking for the employees that are the go-getters. So like, hey, let's get this done. Hey, I need this done. And I love that. I love that. Even though some bosses, you do that to them, they will rip your head off and say, like, I know what I need to do, like, bugger off, right? And some people hate that. But for me, I love it because it's like, okay, let's go. It's the same reason at the gym and everything. It's like, hey, we need to get our workout in today. And I have buddies all the time that will call me out, even on social media. And I love that. I love that ability to be like, hey, let's get this done. Let's accomplish this goal. Let's be a go-getter. But the people that are like, they have to have, like, I literally have to create their task by task, literally spreadsheet and schedule and everything every single day, to where they can't even say, like, hey, or even go down a whole list of checklists and create their own day. I have to create their day for them. Well, now I'm having another second full-time job just to make sure that they do their job.
Yeah. And that's, yeah. So, I mean, if you've been able to document what it is, to communicate what it is, to clearly express and lay out what that is, kind of get them properly trained and up and running, I can appreciate a ramp up period, because everybody's going to need that. But then once you have and you've gone that, sales guru and author Mike Weinberg, he talks about coaching up or coaching out. And so, it is your opportunity to coach them up to that level, or coach them out to either a better role, a better position, a better fit for who they are and what they need.
Yeah. So understand, based on their skill set, what they're fitted for, right? Because the person that is a checklist person, there is places for those people. Like, a lot of people are, oh, those are deadbeats. They're just lazy. They're just everything else. No, they're just assembly line people. Like, that's their skill set. It's very minimal skill set. It's people that work on assembly lines again, and that includes fast food. They know how to do the same task day in and day out without any deviation. This is what they know how to do. They know how to assemble, wrap the burgers. You teach them once, they're great. And they will thrive in that environment.
And they are consistent, right? I think a lot of organizations do actually need people like that. Absolutely. Because they're consistent and they're content, like you said, and they get really good at doing just that. And they like it. They don't have to.
The problem is when you are that person,
if they don't want to.
Yeah. No, the problem is when you're that person, though, is you are at the most risk of having your job replaced. It's because, literally, if it's repetitive and redundant, you have now a skill set that is replaceable by a machine.
It's true. I mean, especially if you have, I've heard lately, like, a lot of venture capital coming in, right? And they're like, hey, you know what? We need to cut these, we need to shave some money. We need to be more profitable. We need to do X, Y, Z. Here's this group of people that fit this mold. We need to get our finances to this level. Go ahead and just, cut these people out, because
like you fire 10 people and say they're at a medium salary, 60,000 a year, right? That's still $600,000 a year the company just saved, even if they have to pay for a $2 million machine or robot to do the job, and say maintenance at 60,000 a year, they're still at a break even point in just over 2 years, right? It's a simple math game. And so if you are that person, I'm not docking it. You do need to have those characteristics, even for me. Like I have to have those characteristics, even though I hate those characteristics necessarily, for myself at least. I'm not saying I hate it in other people. I'm saying I hate it for me, because when I have to do the same redundant thing over and over and over again, I zone out. I have a hard time focusing. I need that variety. I need to be challenged. And that stuff does not provide challenge or anything else. But I need to have that consistency, and I need to have that consistency in action to actually get results. It's the same thing. I have to consistently post this podcast if I hope to get in front of more people. Because
exactly.
Now, right?
Yep. So you do need that consistency. And then I love that you said that the variety as well, right? So focus is that superpower and really mastering and refining your craft, but then you do need these repetitions, just like at the gym, as you mentioned as well, to go and do some of the similar or consistent things so that you do build that up, that credibility, that muscle mass, or whatever it is that you're working on, so that you can achieve that muscle memory. Yeah, so that you can achieve the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. So biggest takeaways I would say here, again, with doing training for doing processes, is understand and get good as a leader. Understand and get good at identifying their characteristics within the employee process. You should be able to learn. If you don't have questions that figures out where their learning style is and what their skill style is what I call it. Meaning, like, hey, what do they excel in? Do they excel in repetition? Do they excel in critical thinking, problem solving, everything else, right? That really will change drastically what the role is. And if you should know also what the skill style is within that organization, within that role that you are hiring for. And if you don't know that and you hire somebody that has a very different skill style, they're a critical thinking, but you have them in a redundant task, like assembly line type job, don't be surprised that they zone out and they don't do things and that they suck at that job, and that because they're losing their ever freaking mind. Right?
And right, like, and something else to keep in mind, and I saw this for the first time a while back when I was doing a integrity selling facilitation. A lot of times you hire people that are just like you. And so keep that in mind. If you're trying to do something that's outside of your wheelhouse or your comfort zone, and you hire somebody just like you, do you think that they're going to be fulfilled in that role? Possibly not, right? And so you've got to consider about getting outside of your comfort zone of who to bring in. And so what I mean by that is that with integrity selling, you've got 4 behavioral styles: talker, doer, controller, and supporter. And for the first time ever, I saw an organization with more supporters as that dominant behavioral style than as professional salespeople than I had ever seen. And as the day went on and we learned about each other's behavioral styles throughout the group, guess what the leader was? He was a supporter. And I'd never seen that until now. But then it made sense to me because most sales organizations are talkers. Oh, you can talk, you got the gift of gab, blah, blah, blah. And so a lot of sales leaders will that will hire people just like them that can go and sell. And that tends to be the talker dominant personality behavior style there. But just kind of think about that of what is your outcome you're trying to achieve. And if you're trying to duplicate you, sure, maybe somebody just like you that do that. But if you need to cover other areas where it's less comfortable or less meaningful or fulfilling to you, think about someone that has an opposite or different behavioral style than you do.
Absolutely. And this kind of comes into so it's the same metaphor here. You can't have really healthy teams until you yourself are in a healthier mindset. You can't have a healthier relationship until you yourself are in a healthier relationship status, or something that somebody that is a healthier relationship will do that. Meaning that if you hire a bunch of employees and it quickly dissolves into a toxic atmosphere, chances are there's an unresolved conflict within yourself that you need to address, right? If you find yourself constantly as an employee dissolving into that or gravitating towards the toxic environments or staying in those, then there's some unresolved either trauma or whatever that you need to resolve yourself if you want better, if you want different, if you want this other things.
Yeah.
And so it always begins with us and having self accountability in all things, right? And that's hard to hear, right? Because if you have had a lot of abusive partners or a lot of abusive things and everything, yeah, it's easy to point the finger and be like, hey, it's them. They're the psychos. They're the this or this. Or all I've had is these trash employers and all I've had is this. Well, if that's all you've had, then look at what you're doing to attract that.
Yep. Yeah. We'll
That's
look inwardly.
in the nuts. It's not fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Look inward there. So, man, this has been a great conversation surrounding that of being able to kind of help speak one another's language and appreciate, where they might be coming from, even if it's different than yours. But if you can get to that level, that's where the magic is really going to happen in moving forward and accomplishing goals and making a difference.
Absolutely. So again, in summary, just make sure that you have proper trainings, processes, and everything else. If you don't know what those are, go back to the previous podcasts and look through those, evaluate those, see what you're doing, be able to learn. That might be a next podcast for next, frankly, is let's do it on identifying like the learning styles or their skill style.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great.
Because a lot of people are like, well, I'm not sure how to recognize or what the best way is to recognize somebody that has a hands-on learning style or has critical thinking or a problem-solving learning style or whatever it may be. I think breaking that down, being able to figure out, okay, does this person actually fit within that role? And how to identify what skill style it is for that role in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So let's do that next week. So next week we'll do that. I know we've said in the past too that we were supposed to have some other guests on, and unfortunately, like we had those tornadoes and that, which actually was one of our guests. We had another one, had a medical emergency, so we're gonna try to get some of those guests back on here. But that's what's happened, and that. So if you're wondering, like, oh, what happened to those? Because you're supposed to have those people on, and that's why. So I know this is kind of late notice and everything of what had happened with those, but anyway.
But if you guys know of a guest that you think would be a good fit for this, right? A good cultural fit for our show, definitely have them reach out.
Do you have somebody that is a higher level employee, right? Meaning that they have built a career and is known as a credible expert within that field of expertise? Or do you know a business owner that can provide value and wants to pour back into the community to build or add value and everything else? Those are the people that we want to talk to. We don't want to just talk to anybody. We don't want to just have anybody on. We want people that are willing to lead with value, because those people are the ones that also understand that it's the mindset of plenty, right? There's plenty enough business to go around. There's plenty enough other stuff. There's plenty enough success and everything. I can do just well, and that's why I have a lot of friends in the IT realm. I have a lot of friends in the e-com space. I have a lot of friends in the consulting and manufacturing space, because I also know that they're going to have their niches. I'm going to have mine, and we can both be successful. We can both thrive, and we can both do that, right?
Yep, absolutely. Send them our way.
Absolutely. So we will catch you on next week on the next episode. Again, like, share, do all that jazz. If you gain value, if you didn't like it, by all means, write us a scathing review and everything about how we're all trash and idiots. I'm perfectly fine with that. So, but just do something, and that's instead of just watching and then ghosting out of here. So,
yeah,
absolutely. So we will catch you again on that podcast, and thanks for joining us.
Peace.